Welcome to Love and Abuse, the show about helping you identify poisonous communication and toxic behavior. You deserve to be treated with respect and kindness. That's why it's important that you learn to pinpoint manipulative and controlling behavior so that you keep your power and your sanity. I'm your host, Paul Coliani. Hello, and thanks for joining me for another episode of Love and Abuse. I want to remind you that all information on this podcast is meant for informational and educational purposes only. Always seek a professional for your mental health and well-being, and always pick your battles wisely. I have a battle to talk about today. It's from someone who sent me an email who said they were having a difficult time with an abusive family member. That family member is their own child. In fact, this child is no longer a child. He's about, won't tell you his real age because of privacy reasons, but let's just say that he's not a teenager anymore, and he is someone's son. And this woman wrote to me and said, my son, she said he is mentally ill and that he has a disability and addictions and depression and anxiety and other not officially diagnosed traits similar to borderline personality and some other things. And she said that it's been difficult living with him. She writes, he has a job and is connected with county vocational and educational services, and she has done her best to be a great mom, but she says, now I know I should have been a better disciplinarian. He's been involuntarily hospitalized for credible suicide threats in the past few years and has been arrested for drugs and domestic violence against other family members. So she goes on and on about how difficult this person is. And this is a very difficult challenge. Talk about a battle. This is a battle that she's been having. And half the battle or most of the battle seems to be with herself, because she's a mom. And she didn't say this in the email, but I get that maybe she thinks she's a failure as a mom. And this is something that is very common, unfortunately, that when your child goes off and does their thing and you don't approve of that thing, or they're being hurtful to you, you can take it personally. I mean, if you have children. And so you have this dynamic where you thought you did the best you could, at least with the resources that you had available and the education that you had and everything that you knew about parenting, but children turn into individuals with their own thoughts and their own beliefs and their own perceptions of the world, and they can become abusive just like anyone else. Anyone can become abusive and hurtful and disrespectful and all of the above that this woman is unfortunately going through. Her question to me is, how do I stop beating myself up over this? Now, I didn't read you the rest. She did say that she was able to move away from him, and now they have limited contact, and she still pays some of his bills, but she is plagued with guilt and constantly questioning herself. She feels strongly that she needs to stay away from him, but she's a wreck. She wants to have a peaceful, healthy, happy life, but she can't stop beating herself up over this. So her question really is, do you have any thoughts or advice on this? And this is a tough one. This is where you have somebody in your life that you've raised since they were born, and they grew up into someone that is not pleasant to be around. There's two things going on here. There's a family member that's abusive, and then there's your child that's abusive. An abusive family member, like an aunt or an uncle or even a mom or a dad, might be a little easier to separate, even though there could be a lot of pain involved, because you want a relationship with this person, but you can't seem to get it. So you got to do the best thing you can do for yourself. You need to protect yourself. You need to protect those you love. And sometimes being around those people is impossible. So you can't be around those people. So you separate, you move away, you get away and protect yourself in any way you can. So that's somewhat easier, quote, easier, than dealing with your own children who turn out to be abusive. When your own children turn out to be hurtful or abusive or disrespectful, there is something that you need to come to terms with, which is you are not their only influence. And if you're a parent, I want you to just repeat this to yourself. I am not their only influence. They are an individual person, not just your kid. They have their own thoughts, their own desires, their own beliefs and perceptions, like I said earlier. And you need to understand that you are not their only influence. In fact, as soon as they reach a certain age, you become the least influential person in their life. This isn't true for everyone. Some children are influenced by their parents their whole life, but the kids that grow up learning behaviors that they didn't get from you, those behaviors aren't influenced by you. Those behaviors were learned somewhere else. Now, they could have been learned from another family member. They could have been learned from your partner, your husband, your wife. They could have been learned through a number of ways. But if you've tried hard to bring them up right and do what you can for them, you have to burn this into your brain that you are not their only influence. Therefore, you are not to blame for their behavior. Look at my girlfriend. She has a son that is completely making up his own mind, his own decisions, and making some decisions that she wholeheartedly disagrees with. But that doesn't matter because he's now at that age where he's going to make his own decisions and he's going to face the consequences of those decisions. And we'll see what happens, and we hope that nothing bad happens. And if he's listening, I love you and I want you to be safe. I don't know if he listens to this show, but in case he does, it's not against him. It's just that we worry about him. We want him to be safe. We want him to make the right decisions. And according to us, he's not, or at least some of them. He makes a lot of great decisions, but some of them, you just hope that they learn and grow through it and figure it out so that they make the right decisions later. But sometimes they don't. Sometimes they make the wrong decisions according to us. And I remember many wrong decisions I made when I was his age as well. We just don't want those decisions repeated or their decisions to be worse than ours. But what can we do? We just let them live. And hopefully they will live wisely and happily and will learn how to make the right decisions. But sometimes you're in that in-between state between being a child and being an adult. And in that in-between state, you're going to do things and say things that aren't necessarily in alignment with the adults that care about you in your life, or even the younger people that care about you. There are younger people that can look at someone like that and see that they're making the wrong decisions as well. But my point is, you bring them up the best you can and hope they make the right decisions, but there's a point where they go off on their own. And when they're off on their own, you are no longer there to influence them. And there's a point where you become much less of an influence and more of a support system when they need it. And this is a challenge as well, because if they are hurting you, their support system, then it is difficult to be there for them because they're hurting you and looking to you for support. Because this woman said in her email that one day he's attacking her and then the next day he's saying he loves her and without her he'd be dead. There's a lot more to the email I didn't read, but this is what she's dealing with. So she is going through this cycle of feeling okay and then feeling miserable and then feeling scared, and there's fear and there's worry and there's stress, and she doesn't know what to do. And she's doing the best she can. She's moved away. She has limited contact, but she still has ties. And these ties, some of them are unbreakable. He will always be her son. This person is always going to be her son, but he doesn't always have to be in her life. This might be hard to hear and accept and understand. That doesn't mean she has to turn him off completely or go complete no contact on him unless it's dangerous for her, which it might be. And then I recommend it, but it doesn't mean she has to cut him off completely. It just means she'll be there when he needs her, but doesn't have to be there the rest of the time. So she can still show up as a mom in that respect, but doesn't have to be there to take the abuse. And hopefully when he grows up a little bit or grows out of this phase, or if it's not a phase and it really is a mental illness or bipolar or whatever it is, hopefully he gets help and he grows beyond it. And like a lot of kids that I've seen grow into their teens and 20s and beyond, they eventually reach a point where they reflect on the past and they realize that they may have mistreated some of the people they've loved. I remember I did this. I mean, I wasn't like this at all, but there were times where I could have treated people better. In fact, I remember mistreating my mom once. I was like 16, 17, and I told her to get me something at the store. I mean, I asked her to get me something at the store. And I love my mom, and I've never thought that I've mistreated her, but I remember she got me what I was looking for. It was computer diskettes back then in the 80s. And when she told me how much she paid for them, I was shocked. I was thinking, what, you paid that much for them? I can't believe you paid that much for them. That's ridiculous. And she started crying. I immediately felt bad. I immediately felt so bad that I made my mom cry. And I apologized and I said, I'm sorry, you didn't know. And, this is me just going off and I'm so sorry. But I didn't know at the time that I was mistreating her until it was shown to me that I was mistreating her, until she started crying. Luckily, I caught it right when it happened. But some people don't get it. Some people will see you cry and not think twice about it. They won't activate that empathy and connect and realize how much they've hurt you. And if they don't do that, then they may never get it. If they don't get it the moment it happens, the chances are that they'll reflect on it later and really feel bad about it. There's still a chance, but they're minimal. Because if somebody can see you in pain or hurting and not stop doing that to you, there's something going on in there. Maybe they're just holding on to their anger. I mean, this can happen. They can hold on to their anger. They can hold on to whatever emotional energy they're holding on to, and they don't want to let it go. So if you cry, they don't want to snap out of that and be vulnerable themselves. And later on, these certain people can reflect on that and then come back and apologize. And I think that is sometimes allowable, depends on the relationship and how often this happens. But what if they reflect on it and it doesn't bother them? What if they never come back to apologize? That's another issue. And this woman that says that he comes back and apologizes every now and then, now she is facing this tumultuous cycle of love and abuse that keeps coming her way. And certainly because he's her child, it's very difficult for her to disconnect and not love him and not be a part of his life. Yet at the same time, she's smart enough to know that she needs to be away from him because he's just a dangerous individual, whether that's emotionally dangerous or even physically dangerous. I don't know if that'll ever happen to her, but she stated in her letter that he's already been physically dangerous to another family member. So we have to be aware that this person does have something going on, and so we need to stay away. Let me come back to what her real conflict is here, which is she's beating herself up and she feels so guilty. The first thing I said, you got to remember that you are not the only influence in this person's life. And this goes with anyone in a relationship with an abusive person. You're not the only influence. Sometimes you're just the punching bag. You could be the verbal punching bag or the emotionally abused punching bag, and you are there as their expression of what's going on inside of them. And that's an awful thing to hear. It's an awful thing for me to say, but it can be true sometimes. Sometimes the people that we're supposed to feel the most love and support from end up using us as that verbal punching bag or emotional punching bag where they are just hurting us over and over again. And if that's the case, if you are the punching bag, then yes, you need to reconsider the relationship and how this is playing out, because maybe there's not enough self-worth there or self-compassion, or you are really stuck in this relationship and you can't get out for some reason, or you're just not ready to leave, or there are circumstances why you can't leave. There might be one or more of the above, but you simply haven't been able to stop the behavior and you're still there as that verbal punching bag. And I don't want you to be there. I don't want you to be in that position, just like I don't want this mom to be in that position with her son. which it sounds like, this is the good news, that she's not in that position anymore. And like I said at the beginning, her conflict or her challenge seems to be the feelings of guilt that she has and beating herself up. This is something I've said on other shows, and I want to repeat it here because I think it's important that when you say these words, that they mean something in ways that perhaps they didn't mean before. And it's the process I use for forgiveness. Forgiveness in the sense that you don't have to forgive anyone but yourself. You can forgive other people if you want. Totally up to you. I won't take that away from you, but you don't have to forgive anyone but yourself. And the way I forgive myself is I say these words exactly. I forgive myself a break for the way I showed up and for how I behaved and for what I did and thought I could do better. Those aren't the exact words, but I do say the words, I forgive myself a break. When you mix those two words like I did, you are not only giving yourself a break, but you are almost subliminally forgiving yourself, even if you don't want to. Even if you feel like you should own this and you feel like I did wrong and I deserve to feel this way, you say these words, I forgive myself a break for how I showed up. And however you want to word that at the end, I like to look at it as I forgive myself a break for how I showed up back then, for what I did, for the knowledge I didn't have, for what I could have done better, for everything that led up to the way I feel today. I forgive myself a break. The wordplay is there purposefully so that it sinks in at the deeper level. Even if you don't like the way I worded that, there's a message in between the lines here, which is we carry guilt throughout life because we believe we did something wrong or we could have done something better. And guilt is supposed to be a fleeting emotion. That doesn't mean you won't feel bad. That doesn't mean you won't have some level of maybe regret, even though I don't really like that word either, but it doesn't mean you won't have the thoughts that you could have done better. I have many memories in my mind from past events that I know I could have done better. I know it. I know I could have done better. And whenever guilt comes up, I forgive myself a break. I have to give myself a break, and I have to forgive myself, because if I don't, I get stuck in the guilt. And the guilt prevents me from many things, from making up for what I feel guilty about, first of all, and for moving forward. If I'm stuck in the guilt, I can't move forward. I don't mind being stuck in the pain of things I could have done differently, even though pain is unpleasant, but I would rather feel the pain of knowing I could have done better instead of the guilt of feeling there's nothing I can do. Because that's what guilt does. It causes you to stay in a pattern of nothing I can do about it. It's done, it's over, and I did wrong, and there's nothing I can do about it now, and because of that, I'm going to keep the guilt to remind me that I was an awful person. You don't need a reminder to tell you that you're an awful person. First of all, you're not an awful person. Because if you feel guilty, that means you're not an awful person. Guilt isn't for awful people. Guilt is for kind people, for compassionate people, for caring people. If you're a caring, kind, and compassionate person, then guilt just proves that. And because guilt is proving that you're kind, compassionate, and caring, then you had good intentions and you did the best you could. And even if you did something that was intentional at the time, if you feel guilty about it today, then that intention is no longer there and it no longer applies because you've learned, you've grown, and you've healed to the point where you feel guilty. And when you feel guilty, that's the moment you take steps toward making up for feeling guilty. This is where I go into how you resolve guilt. And I've talked about this on my other show, The Overwhelmed Brain, over at theoverwhelmedbrain.com. Just look up the word guilt and you'll find several episodes I've talked about how to resolve guilt. But my quick path to resolving guilt is to do everything you possibly can in the opposite direction that made you feel guilty. I know that sounds very basic and it doesn't sound like it's going to work, but hear me out. You do everything you can in the opposite direction of the guilt. For example, I've used this story before. When I was in my 20s, I brought my 2 cats to the shelter, the Humane Society or whatever it is, so that I didn't have to deal with them. I felt guilty about that for I don't know how long, because I was young, I was stupid, and I didn't know how to take care of animals, and they were just a bother to me, even though I loved them. But apparently I was just too immature, and I took them to the pound, or whatever it's called. And it was a very sad day for me, and many years after that, I thought back on that and thought how selfish I was and stupid I was, and those were living, breathing, emotional beings that I brought there, and I just ripped them out of their family home and put them somewhere where I didn't have to deal with them. So guilty. I felt so guilty. And I didn't know what to do about it because it was done. There was nothing else I could do about it. It was years later. They were either adopted or I don't even know if they were euthanized. I don't know. But the guilt plagued me. And I had to deal with it. I had to figure it out. I had to get past it because I could not be happy. And a part of me didn't want to be happy. Part of me needed to feel like I was being punished. I believe that I wanted punishment for that. And I think this is another part of guilt, is that we believe we need to be or deserve to be punished, so we continue to feel guilty. You need to get past this. You do not need to be punished. The punishment came as soon as the guilt arrived. And yes, you had to experience guilt for maybe a few days, maybe a few months, but no longer. Yes, you can go a few months feeling guilty, but no longer. How do we get rid of the guilt? Going in the opposite direction, for me, regarding my cats, was when I matured and got another cat, I treated that cat like the king of the house. I treated him like gold. I treated him like royalty. He was my best friend. I took him everywhere. I would not get an apartment unless they allowed pets. I would not go anywhere without him. He was my baby. He was my kid. The other part of my journey had to do with contributing, donating to shelters that housed cats until they were adopted. That was part of it. Another part is being that person that rescued a cat. If I saw a cat in need, they won't let you come to them typically. But I remember when I was married, my wife and I trapped this cat because he was sitting in the snow. And he was just going to lay there in the cold snow and go to sleep. And it wasn't right. So we ended up getting a box and bringing him to that place that housed cats and donating to them, and they gave him shots. They found out that he had leukemia, but he was able to heal and get better, and by the time they were done with him, he looked amazing. He got adopted, and he had a new home. So my guilt was alleviated because I kept going in the opposite direction, but it doesn't mean I don't feel bad. It doesn't mean that I can't think back on that time and still feel really bad, still shed a tear about it. But I won't let guilt stop me from moving forward. You have to move forward with this. This person who wrote to me that said she's beating herself up and she's full of guilt and she can't stop questioning herself. First of all, identify why you feel guilty. Why do you feel guilty? She might say, I could have raised my son better. She even mentioned, I should have been more of a disciplinarian. Going in the opposite direction, you might say, okay, what's the opposite of that? Be more of a disciplinarian. You might go in that direction. It might not work with a son at his age now because he's now an adult. But what can you do to help him to the point where you can do no more? And this is where you do everything you can to help, and then you move on. This is where you make a decision that you're going to help as much as you can and then move on, but that as much as you can part has to be enough to push you in the opposite direction of what you feel guilty about. So if you feel like you gave him the wrong advice, or you feel guilty because you think you raised him wrong, then maybe part of your journey needs to be to apologize to him. That sounds weird, I know, and you probably don't want to do this, but again, hear me out, apologize to him saying, I made a lot of mistakes when I was younger, when I was raising you. And I just want to apologize. I just want to say, I'm so sorry. I think sometimes your life is harder because of how I raised you. And I just want to apologize for that. That may or may not be how you feel. And that may or may not be something he thinks about at all. He may not see that at all. But I want you to try that on or something like it that pushes you in the opposite direction of the guilt. Because what you're doing here is you are accessing that part of you that felt like you did something wrong. And how do you right a wrong like that? Because if you really feel like you didn't raise him well, or you should have been more of a disciplinarian, or you should have loved him differently, or you should have paid more attention, all of these should haves should turn into forward momentum. And what I mean by that is you do something in the opposite direction of the guilt, which means you think about everything that you feel guilty about, and then you try to make up for it in the opposite direction, which is a forward direction. And you might have to tell him you apologize for the way you showed up. This is the same thing. I forgive myself for how I showed up then. And I apologize to you for how I showed up then. Now, this doesn't mean it's your fault. It doesn't mean that what he's doing had anything to do with his upbringing. Because if this really is a mental illness, or he's dealing with other influences, he's had some peer pressure from other people that didn't have his best interest in mind, or whatever it is, you are a tiny component of his decision making, if at all. So if you're beating yourself up because of the decisions he's making in his life, I'm giving you permission to stop beating yourself up and allowing yourself to move forward from this. Because if he really does have all these issues, and you're not in that stable emotional and mental psychological state that you need to be in when he suddenly shows up at your door one day, it's going to be a lot more difficult on you, which means some of this past baggage that you're carrying around can't be there anymore. And I know this is easier for me to say. I know I'm not getting to the root of this, which may have to do with some of your self-worth and your self-esteem, or all of your thoughts on the past. I mean, there's a lot probably going on in you, which is why I'm asking you to remember what you think you didn't do enough of or did wrong, and do what you can now in the opposite direction so that you can do your part and move on. And this is the part B. I think I said A before. This is part B, is that after you've done everything you can, you move on, because now you can say, I did everything I can. I mean, this works with any abusive relationship. Once you've done everything you can, it's not time to try more. It's not time to try anything different. It's passing the baton. It's hitting the ball to the other side of the court. It's saying, now it's on you. Now it's all you. Because I've done everything I can, and I feel good about what I've done. And that sometimes can be hard. Sometimes you can't say, I feel good about everything I've done, because you might still feel like you could do more. But here's the thing. I want you to think about what you can do today. I don't know if that means you financially support him for the next year, and then you cut it off because you're giving him a year's notice saying you're on your own after that. That could be what you do. You give him a whole year and you say that, and you financially support him in that way. If that's what you want to do, I don't know. It's something that you have to decide. Or maybe it's sending him a letter saying, I truly apologize for the way I showed up, for what I did, how I raised you. I feel like I didn't give you enough. I feel like I neglected you, but not highlighting what he's doing badly or wrong. Don't even go there. Just make it all about you and say, I've been thinking about how I messed up as a parent. I mean, if that's in you, if that's not in you, then take my words and throw them out. But I'm giving you some options that will help you go in the opposite direction of that guilt so that you can find some closure with this. It could be that financial support. It could also be that letter of apology or an in-person apology. It doesn't even have to be an apology. It could just be sharing your thoughts. And it could be something completely different. It could be you reaching out to a doctor or a psychologist or somebody that you know can help him and you do your best to make that happen. And maybe that will work, maybe not. Maybe he doesn't want help. I mean, there's another thing. We don't know if he wants help. Maybe he doesn't. And if he doesn't, this is where, again, you've passed the baton. And sometimes the passing of the baton is just saying, I'll be here if you need me. That's it. Sometimes you pass the baton that way. Sometimes this is how it has to go. I'll be here if you need me. I love you. I want you to be happy, but I need to take care of myself most of the time. So if you ever need me, absolutely reach out to me, if that's what you want. So I know there's a lot to explore here. I mean, abusive family members, they can be very difficult, but abusive children, that is a lot more difficult, I'm sure, in many ways, because we want our children to grow up happy and healthy, and we want to have a relationship for all of our lives. And if we can't have that, then maybe you think there's something you did wrong. And sometimes it's not that at all. Remember, children grow up into individuals that have their own lives, and there are all kinds of influences out there that aren't you. And because they're not you, they're going to get the wrong ideas, and they're going to get the wrong thoughts in their head. And if there's a mental illness, if there's bipolar, if there's something going on psychologically, then they're going to show up in ways that we just don't know how to handle. And sometimes it's going to be hurtful. And when it's hurtful, then we have to make some hard decisions. We can show up for them only so much. And then if we can't show up for them anymore because they're just too hurtful, then we need to put our time and energy and attention toward things that we really value in our lives. Even if we value the people hurting us, we can still value them, but we value them only when they show up as kind and respectful. And when they don't show up that way, then we have to accept that sometimes Jekyll and Hyde mentality and stay away. And we have to accept that that's who they are and not expect that they'll change. In fact, I just talked about this on my Overwhelmed Brain newsletter, where there are 4 choices, and all 4 of them have to do with acceptance or not. The 4 choices are: accept who they are and keep the relationship, accept who they are and separate from that person, reject who they are and keep the relationship, or reject who they are and separate from that person. What you choose of those 4 will determine how your life goes from that point on, because we can accept people even when they're hurtful and hateful. We can accept that they'll never change. I mean, we may not like it, and you may say, no, I won't accept them. I mean, absolutely. You don't have to, but we can. We can accept that that person will never change. That's who they are. I accept that that's who they'll always be. That's really what acceptance comes down to, is accepting that's who they'll always be. That may not be true. They may not always be that way, but let's just take that for a moment and say, I accept that that person will be that way always. They will never, ever change. Knowing this, what's my decision now? This may not work with a mom and a child, but maybe any person in your life. Knowing that they will never, ever change, what will my decision be then? Whatever decision's on your mind, whatever you need to do for yourself. If you know something will never change or someone will never change, what would your decision be then? Because once you accept that someone won't change, your thought processes change. You make decisions differently. There's no hoping, there's no praying, there's no wishing. It's all based on what you see today and accepting that this will always be the way it is. And if this is always the way it is, what's your decision then? This is one of those 4 choices I talked about. Accept and keep the relationship, accept and leave the relationship, reject and keep the relationship, or reject and stay in the relationship. And I can tell you there's a real problem with those who reject who the person is and stay in the relationship. That is the biggest, most dangerous type of relationship, because what ends up happening is that you end up staying the victim in a relationship with someone you can't accept. It doesn't mean you're a bad person because you can't accept them, but what it does mean is that you are exposing yourself to more hurtful behavior, and you're also self-victimizing, meaning you're complaining about it. You wish you would stop. You feel bad. You feel guilty. You feel all kinds of things, and you think all kinds of things because you just can't accept that that's who they are, because you saw a different side of them before. You saw a different side of them many years ago or sometime in the past. And why can't they be that person again? Where is that person? I know that person's in there. This is you not being able to accept that that's who they are today. What you see is what you get. It's a computer term, WYSIWYG. What you see is what you get. This is what you get. That might not be pleasant to hear, but it makes decision making a lot easier. That doesn't mean they can't change. People can change. People do change. Sometimes they can change with us, and sometimes they need us out of our lives so that they can change. My wife needed me out of her life so that I could change. If she didn't want to leave me, I would never have discovered my judgmental and emotionally abusive ways. I was an emotionally abusive person, and I look back at that person and think, who the hell was that? That was me for a long time. That's me talking about myself. That was me for a long time. I remember who I was in so many relationships, and it took many people leaving my life for me to finally get that I was the common denominator for all these relationship issues. And when that happened, it turned my life around. But it couldn't have happened if she stayed, because then I never would have had accountability. I never would have gotten it. Because if she didn't leave, then obviously it wasn't bad enough for her to leave, so my behavior's not so bad. But she did leave, and that's what it took. I'm not saying you have to leave. I'm not saying you have to separate. Anyone listening to this in any type of relationship, this doesn't mean you have to be apart from the person. I'm just telling you that it's so much easier to make a decision when you realize that the person that you're thinking about right now, that you're in any type of relationship with right now, will never, ever change. And that's what she did. She saw me as never, ever changing. And thank God she left, because that's what helped me change. So she made a decision that was right for both of us. Your decision may be different. Your decision may be getting therapy together. The person who wrote to me, maybe therapy is an option for you. Maybe you need to talk to someone about it. Maybe there needs to be an intervention. I'm not qualified to really tell you that that's what you should do or shouldn't. I'm just saying that you consider all your options, do what you can, and then it might be time to wash your hands of it. And you can still be there for them, but not always to the point where you're getting attacked or anything like that. So I am grateful for you writing and sharing this story with me. I really hope that something I said today helped. It is a difficult situation. I know it is, and I don't have the magic pill, but I do know that you are allowed to stop feeling guilty, because we all do the best we can with the resources that we have. And sometimes we just don't have the right resources, and we definitely don't know the future. We can guess all we want, but we don't know the future. We don't know how someone's going to turn out. We don't know if the person we love today is going to be the same person tomorrow. We don't know if they're going to lie to us or cheat on us or steal from us. Hopefully they won't. Hopefully that's just illogical thinking, but sometimes it's true. We don't know. So what can we do? We can only see today for what it is and who they are, how they're treating us, and how we feel about it. And then we move forward based on what we know today. And again, I am freeing you from feeling guilty. I'm freeing you from this. You do not have to feel guilty. Guilt is fleeting. It's a message to let you know that something else needs to be done. Guilt is a short-term punishment, and it's time to let it go. I appreciate you tuning in. Share this with others that might benefit. Love and Abuse is the official podcast of the MEAN Workbook, an assessment and healing guide for difficult relationships. The workbook provides an evaluation of your relationship based on a 200-point assessment. It is geared toward romantic relationships, but many have used it to determine if family or others in their life are being manipulative or emotionally abusive as well. If you are in a difficult relationship and you want to pinpoint the unhealthy behaviors causing you to leave so many interactions feeling bad, let the workbook help you discover the specific components of bad behavior and put into words what you're experiencing. Get the tools you need to help you reach clarity. Visit loveandabuse.com for more information. This show exists to remind you that you are not alone and you're not going crazy. You deserve to be treated with respect and kindness. You deserve honesty and sincerity. You deserve to be treated as worthy and significant. Because you are. Thanks again for joining me. We'll talk again soon.